Here's another story that's annoying the hell out of me at the moment. Britain's youngest terrorist, who plotted to murder police officers at the age of 14, right? He can be freed from jail now, according to the Parole Board.
Well,
He's 20.
yeah, because he was a child, I suppose, at the time.
No, you should. No. You're 14. You know what you're doing.
Yeah, but you are
14,
a juvenile,
you know
aren't
what
you,
you're doing.
Till you're 18.
Move him to... No, he won't have been in a proper prison, will he?
No.
So move him to a prison now for 20 years. He's a guy who plotted to kill cops.
When he was 14, though.
Yeah, he sent encrypted messages instructing a jihadist to launch attacks during an Anzac Day parade in Australia in 2015. Our very good friend, we haven't talked to him for ages, security and terror expert Will Geddes. Will, good evening to you, sir.
Very good evening to you, sir, too.
What are you doing this lockdown?
I'm pretty much still doing my normal job, James, because I've got to run around and keep people safe where I possibly can.
Yeah. It's become more difficult, I would have thought. Extra.
Ash and I were thinking of actually offering you our services. We thought we might be quite useful at that.
Every time, chaps, you know, we're still putting you through the background checks, and they're very complicated with you two.
Yeah, he's still abseiling into buildings, but he's doing it at a distance of 2 metres.
Absolutely, Ash. God, you can never be too safe, my friend.
Exactly.
Joking apart, William, tell me about your views on this. A kid, 14, gets caught and put in prison for 6 years. Should he be let out?
I think we have to put this into context, James. I think we have to look at RXJ, as he is referred to, because his name is not going to be released to the general public. And he has been granted that privilege of anonymity, the same as those individuals who carried out the horrific and brutal killing of James Bulger, amongst a few. But this individual, at the age of 14, and remember the age of criminal responsibility in this country is 12 years old, that he was 2 years above that there's still criminal responsibility, had amassed something like 24,000 followers, had been recruited by Islamic State directly, and, as you rightly said, was someone who spurred on and encouraged and incited Sevdet Besim, a 18-year-old, I think he was 18 or 19-year-old ISIS sympathizer in Australia, to carry out attacks on Anzac Day. So he had sent something like 3,000 messages in advance of Sevdet Besim being actually apprehended by the counter-terrorism police. So personally, I think we're probably the only country in the world that is releasing him back into population, regardless of the conditions the Parole Board might think are mitigating a safe release.
So he's not been de-radicalised?
Hang on. Who are these stupid people? I don't give a stuff whether he's de-radicalised or not.
Well,
he
that's
hasn't
important,
learned his
isn't it?
lesson
That's
yet.
important.
No. Well, it probably is important to them. But, you know, who do they think they are? Who are these people who make this decision?
Well, you know, it's a difficult one, James, and I don't know whether I can place the responsibility entirely on the Parole Board. Unfortunately, the legislation as it stands right now enables, and quite rightly in certain circumstances, for people to be able to be given a chance to, if you like, remediate on their past offences and be re-entered into community to rebuild their lives. But I think this situation is way too complicated and way too complex to potentially just give a free pass for an individual to be released. And let alone that release, even if it is potentially sort of mitigatable, this individual will be subject to enormous scrutiny and no doubt surveillance ongoing for an undeterminable period by the security services until they can feel assured he isn't a threat.
But we've seen them being, you know, surveilled, and they can still attack people. And we saw the guy on London Bridge, and he was deemed to be safe, and obviously he just pretended, and he was still as dangerous as he was.
Well, a lot of people pretend when they get interviewed by the Parole Board, don't they? They pretend to be lovely, wonderful, warm human beings and have learned their lessons.
They
come
to be
out
easy to
and
fool.
carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ash, you made a very good point about, obviously, the London Bridge attacker. You know, we've got individuals out there that have been ingrained with a particular ideology, which we know is bananas and is distorted and perverse from what our normal conventional thinking should be. And this kid, if we can call him that, you know, he had, you know, 13-year-olds are very different to, I think, what we were like when we were 13. They're a great deal more mature, a great deal more socially adept than perhaps we were. I certainly could speak for myself when I was at that age. He had inspired, obviously, his schoolmates. He'd created a list of teachers in his school that he even, one of which he went up to and said, I'm going to cut your throat and watch you to bleed to death. This is not what I would call a sane individual, and this is someone that would require ongoing monitoring for a very, very long period of time.
Just changing the subject a moment, Will, and we've been talking about this for a while. Is there anything this country can do about China?
Well, there's a really, really difficult answer, James, because there's all sorts of economic implications, which unfortunately we're dependent on China for, in terms of their investment into the United Kingdom, into industry, into trade, into tourism.
Well, we can always sling them out and tell them we're not giving them their money back.
Well, yeah, but it's that ongoing investment. And I think at the times that we're currently in, James, I don't think we have a great deal of choice, particularly the mess that our economy is in right now as a result of, obviously, this pandemic.
Yeah, but that's the Chinese's fault, isn't it?
Well, again, yeah, that's one perhaps for your listeners to debate for the rest of this show. Yes, one could attribute a good proportion of the responsibility back to China. I mean, personally, I think there should be some sort of leverage against that in terms of the collateral damage that has been created and a responsibility by the Chinese government to make reparations for the damage that has been.
It's never going to happen, though, is it?
Of course not.
I don't know. Listening, you know, I don't know, Ash. Listening to Will's voice, I've known Will a long time now. You know, you can.
But they're actually making money out of it. You know what I mean? Their economy's doing very well out of it.
Ash, listen.
Well, there'll be a lot of business for Will. There'll be a lot of business for Will.
If you listen to Will's voice, he knows more about this than he's letting on.
Of course he does. He's ahead of the game. Yeah, ahead of the curve. Yeah.
He's probably over there at the moment.
Oh, he'll be over there, yeah.
Sadly, no. Just in West London, as always, James. Yeah, my wings have been clipped. My wings have been clipped for now.
He'll be. I don't believe that security of the country has been radically curtailed because of COVID.
No, but we lost one of our corvids, didn't we, at the Tower of London? The crows.
One of our ravens.
Ravens have gone. So that's bad security, isn't it? That's a bad sign, Will.
It's a bad omen, Ash, I think, when we lose one of our crows, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, we're getting another one. It's okay.
Really? Oh, that's
and they only live so long. I mean, they can.
I thought they lived quite a long time. They do live about 50.
They do, but you know, some of these are very old, 50 years old or more. Yeah,
you're right.
I'm a big fan of crows. They're kind of the Rottweiler of the bird world, aren't they?
They are, actually.
Yeah. Although, whether it's a crow, a rook, a magpie, a starling, they're all very intelligent birds.
They are. Very clever.
Yeah. I didn't know we were going to go on to ornithology, but it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
That's what happens.
We could be speaking in codes, James. We could be speaking in code.
We could well be. When are we all going to get together and do something really outrageous? That's what I want to know.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, as I think probably most of the listeners are. I was listening to some of the discussions you were having earlier, and certainly in terms of lockdowns and the like, I think we just have to knock this one on the head and take a fairly stiff pill to try and get, over this pandemic right now. But, going to the point you made earlier, James, which is more my subject matter, terrorism has not gone to sleep during this pandemic. I know from friends of mine in the security services that they have been just as busy as ever. It's only curtailed some of their movements. But, one of the biggest risks that we're always looking at is when lockdowns lift and people then flood the streets. And I don't know about you guys, I live near one of the London parks, and I go out there on the weekend quite a bit. And the number of people that are out in the parks is just sort of, I think, indicative of the fact that when lockdowns lift, everybody just wants to get out, and quite understandably. And that's the time where we have to be our most wary, because we know terrorists are always looking for highly populated areas to carry out their attacks.
Yeah, and I think, one of the reasons a lot of people are being a little bit blasé about this pandemic, had there been a terrorist attack that killed a minuscule amount of the people who've died over the past year, we'd all be taking it a lot more seriously.
Yeah, I think it's because it's so intangible. I think it's something that unless it directly affects one of our friends or family members, it's very difficult to quantify it. And I think the message by the government has been confused at best. But again, this is a very complex virus. It's not behaving in the normal fashions that many viruses do. And I think it's very easy to fall into the conspiracy theorist or anti-vax or anti-pandemic sort of skepticism, because one's trying to find answers to something which doesn't have very easy answers to give.
But this is the kind of war situation we're going to face in the future, isn't it? Where a country wants to do something to you, they release some kind of virus that you don't know about. I mean, I don't think this was on purpose, by the way, from China, because they told everybody about it. If they hadn't opened their mouths and said anything, then we'd never have known, would we?
Well, I think the Chinese government, from some of the intel papers I've seen around it, were more guilty of trying to suppress information around it than anything else, until it was at a point where they had no alternative choice, and particularly with a number of Chinese nationals that had been directly within the catchment area of Wuhan, which is not a huge, distance from Shanghai, for example. That you had a lot of people traveling around the world, and it was going to be coming home to roost very quickly for them. So they had to break cover, in the end. However, by which time it had spread, quite enormously. But to go with your conspiracy, James, of, if the government wants to control a country and they release a fictitious or even real virus, that would be probably the most spectacular home goal, in my opinion, because, we look at our crashing economy, you look at the number of people who are out of business and the weight this is now putting on the government. I've had a lot of good friends, as I'm sure you guys have, who've been directly affected, have lost their business, are in dire straits right now.
Yeah. And that'll affect China anyway.
Yeah.
It's going to affect China negatively anyway.
Well, I don't know. China's economy is going
but the world economy bought so
much
much off China that the world economy suffering will, lead to China suffering.
Well, maybe we need to start manufacturing stuff ourselves now, rather than just buying it off everyone else.
I think we try as much as we can, James, but we need that investment, and I think unfortunately that international and foreign investment is going to be even more so, particularly for the technology in the automotive industry, which is, from what I understand, a vast majority of Chinese investment goes into back here in the United Kingdom. So we have to kind of do a deal with the devil, if that's not.
The thing is, there are other manufacturers in the Far East, like Korea, isn't there? South Korea and other countries that are set up for doing it.
Yeah, but it'd be good if we did it ourselves. We could.
I don't think we could,
give
though.
people
I think
jobs.
it's so many years since we've been, and it's so high technology now that we're not really geared up for it.
Is there still unrest in various countries? We don't hear anything going on in Afghanistan or Iran at the moment, but I presume there are still problems.
Well, the Middle East is changing, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. There's there's a lot of problems still in Syria and Iraq. Islamic States have been doing a pretty damn good job of sort of regrouping and refortifying their positions. So, Islamic State has certainly not disappeared, and it wasn't eradicated as people might believe they were in Syria and Iraq. I mean, good friends of mine who were operating down there said, they never actually disappeared. They just had smaller territories they were controlling. But, whilst the world focus is drawn away from that area, we can tend to forget about it. I think what's really interesting, chaps, is what's happening in the States right now. And I think with the inauguration coming up for President-elect Biden, and what we're seeing in Washington right now, I mean, it's historic in terms of the security controls that are going on around there. But some of the intelligence that the FBI has been sharing within sort of somewhat closed circles that I've seen a little bit of about some of the opposition plans of setting off, various different attacks from a domestic terrorism angle. It's pretty scary.
It is.
I shall be glued to the news channels on Wednesday, that's for sure.
Yeah. Isn't Trump coming over here? I think Trump's coming over Scotland, I think.
Very possibly. I think he's going to want to get out of the States as quickly as possible. But what I think is hugely disappointing is that he is not taking more action to try and dissolve the sort of unrest
extinguish
brewing over there in an extinguish it. Yeah.